So today we're going to peel back the neon facade of modern Macau and look at its origin story, which is, frankly, much, much stranger.
It really is.
The Portuguese were there. They didn't take the land.
No, they leased it. Unlike the British in Hong Kong, they weren't a military occupying force. They were tenants.
And to even get that deal, they had to, well, rebrand themselves. The Chinese originally called them Falangji, which basically meant
Unruly barbarians, pirates, essentially.
Yeah.
So to stay, they had to pivot from, warrior to compliant business partner.
And in 1557, they signed the lease. An annual rent.
Paid directly to the local authorities. The Ming Dynasty had banned all direct trade with Japan. There's this huge piracy problem.
So Japan has silver, China has silk, and they can't trade. Silver was worth almost double in China compared to anywhere else.
It was an incredible economic engine. You buy silver cheap in Japan, sail it to Macau, and its purchasing power instantly doubles. That silver actually helped stabilize the whole Ming economy.
The Dutch tried and failed to take Macau in 1622, but the real threat wasn't another European power.
No, the real killer was the British setting up Hong Kong in 1842.
Right.
That's the pivot point in all the data. Hong Kong has a deep water port, Macau's is shallow. All that legitimate trade just, it moves. To survive, Macau had to find a new way to fill its depleted coffers.
So they shifted from silk and science to what the sources call the vice economy.
Well, desperation drives innovation, right? First, it was opium. By the 1770s, it was on most ships leaving the port, but it just exploded after that.
And then came the coolie trade.
A very dark chapter. When the global slave trade was being shut down, Macau jumped in to supply indentured Chinese laborers, mostly for Peru and Cuba.
And the conditions were just horrific. They were kept in warehouses, barracoons, and the mortality rate on the ships could be as high as 35%.
It was a huge source of revenue, sanctioned by the government. And when international pressure finally shut that down, they had to pivot again.
The gambling.
Legalized in 1847, purely as a fiscal survival strategy. By 1899, gaming taxes made up 47% of all government revenue. It became the Monte Carlo of the Orient because it had nothing else left.
It's just this incredible story of adaptation. But politically, their authority was crumbling long before the 1999 handover.
Which brings us to the 12-3 incident in 1966. It started over a school building permit.
Just a minor dispute.
A minor dispute that spiraled into massive riots. The Portuguese administration completely lost control.
1966 on.
The governor was a figurehead. The real power in Macau lay with the pro-Beijing organizations. The handover in 99 was really just the paperwork finally catching up with reality.
The Portuguese were basically tenant guests. They'd been there since 1557, sure, but their whole presence depended on Chinese tolerance. They were renters, not conquerors.
And by the 1960s, that tolerance was wearing thin. Portugal was, well, it was weak.
Incredibly weak. They were bogged down by these draining colonial wars in Africa, Angola, Mozambique, and still reeling from the humiliation of losing Goa to India in 1961.
So the administration of Macau was just trying to keep its head down.
Exactly. And then comes the spark. On Taipa Island, residents want to build a school, the Fangchong School. But the Portuguese officials, they just kept stalling the permits.
Apparently because the usual bribes hadn't been paid.
Right. And this is where the timing becomes explosive. The Cultural Revolution is kicking off right across the border.
You could feel the tension building.
So when the residents just get fed up on November 15th and start building anyway, and the police move in and injure some of them, it's not seen as a permit dispute anymore. The school was just the match, but the Cultural Revolution was the gasoline.
And it escalates fast. By December 3rd, that's a 12-3, we have protesters storming the governor's palace.
And they're reading aloud from Mao's little red book as they do it.
The details from that day are just intense. They toppled the statue of Portuguese colonial hero Colonel Mesquita and literally dragged it through the streets.
Then they broke into government offices, throwing centuries of colonial records out the windows and just setting them on fire. 8 protesters were killed, and martial law was declared.
The Chinese community had all the real power.
And they used it. They organized what they called the Three No's strategy.
The boycott, right. No taxes, no services.
And no selling to the Portuguese. It was a total stranglehold. Portuguese families couldn't buy food. Garbage just piled up because nobody would collect it.
And then Beijing gets involved.
Oh, yeah. They cut off the water supply from the mainland. The governor
had no choice but to capitulate. And the scene of the surrender is just, it's surreal.
It really is. On January 29, 1967, you have the Portuguese governor, Nobre de Carvalho, sitting under a massive portrait of Chairman Mao.
Signing a document that's basically a confession. calling his own government's actions fascist atrocities.
Portugal had to pay compensation.
So they were funding the very groups that had just rioted against them.
And they had to ban all pro-Taiwan KMT forces and agree to send any future refugees fleeing the mainland right back to China. Beijing calculated that Macau was more useful as a kind of neutral doorway for trade, especially during the isolation of the Cultural Revolution.
They wanted a puppet state, not another province.
Precisely.
Okay.
And that's when the local business leader, Ho Yin, becomes the de facto shadow governor. For the next 30 years, the Portuguese flag is flying, but Beijing is calling the shots.
So Portugal is just handling the administration, the trash collection.
Pretty much. They stayed on as administrators, but the real power was gone. And it explains why the 1999 handover was so smooth compared to Hong Kong's. The deal had already been done 30 years before.
So when you think of Macau, the coolie trade.
They called it the piglet trade. It was grim. After the global slave trade was formally abolished, Macau pivoted. Between 1851 and 1874, we're talking about over 200,000 Chinese laborers.
Shipped to Cuba and Peru. And the mortality rates, I saw the numbers, up to 40%.
40%.
Everyone knows about the 1999 handover. But that wasn't the real end of colonial rule, was it?
Not even close. The real end was in 1966.
The 12-3 incident.
Exactly. It all started over something tiny, a permit dispute for a private school, but it just exploded.
Yeah.
The Cultural Revolution was raging right next door, and that energy spilled over.
And then there's that image, the Portuguese governor sitting there signing an apology under a giant portrait of Mao Zedong.
That's the moment, right there. That's when Portuguese authority effectively collapsed. The 1999 handover was just, filing the final paperwork.
So for those last 33 years, they weren't really ruling. They were just
property managers. Beijing was the landlord. Lisbon just changed the light bulbs.
Which brings us to today, and this new 1+4 model. It sounds like something straight out of a corporate strategy meeting.
It is, essentially. It's the latest survival strategy. The 1 is what everyone knows.
Tourism and the resorts, the casinos.
Right, that keeps the lights on. But the 4 is where they see the real future. Big health, high tech, conventions, and most importantly, modern finance.
So it's not just about taking bets from mainland visitors anymore. It's about managing their actual wealth.
Precisely. They're building a bond market. And then you have these mechanisms like the Cross-Boundary Wealth Management Connect.
That's a mouthful.
It is. But think of it like a special kind of plumbing. It's a system to let mainland capital flow legally into international markets, with Macau as the regulated gateway.
So they're pivoting from being a vice city to a high-tech vault.
A safe deposit box with great food.
It really is the ultimate shapeshifter. A silk warehouse, a cannon foundry, a human trafficking hub, a casino, and now a fintech gateway.
And that's the key, I think. Macau has always been loyal to one thing, above all else: its own survival.